Another night arrives, and here we are again, like a familiar friend, bringing stories about psychology and human nature. Let this voice become the gentle background sound for your journey from wakefulness to sleep. Imagine standing at the edge of a sleeping forest just before dawn. The world holds its breath in that liminal space between darkness and light. Mist clings to the earth like forgotten dreams pooling in hollows between ancient trees. The air tastes of pine and damp soil cool against your skin. Your breath makes small clouds in the cold. Somewhere distant, an owl gives its final call before surrendering the night to whatever comes next. You are the only witness to this transition, this threshold moment when the unconscious world prepares to meet the conscious day. In this quiet space, you sense something vast beneath the surface. Not just the forest floor, but something deeper, an entire architecture of meaning that exists below the visible world. The trees above have roots below. What you see is only half the story. The rest lives in darkness and depth in the rich soil of what remains hidden. There is a world inside you like this, vast, uncharted, and alive. It dreams while you're awake. It hides what you refuse to see. It speaks in symbols, not words. And if you listen carefully beneath the noise of your daily thoughts, it tells the truth about who you are and who you might become. This is not metaphor. This is psychology for sleep and waking. Both the recognition that your mind is not a single room, but an entire house, most of which you've never explored. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist born in 1875, spent his life mapping this inner territory. He didn't just study mental illness. He didn't just catalog symptoms. He mapped the soul itself, tracing the patterns that shape every human life, regardless of culture, time, or circumstance. Where others saw chaos, Jung saw structure. Where others saw pathology, Jung saw meaning. Where others saw individual neurosis, Jung discovered universal patterns that connect every human being to something ancient and shared. He found gold hidden in shadow. He found healing in the wound itself. He found that the psyche was not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. Tonight, as you settle into the Psychology for Sleep reflections, you're embarking on a journey inward, not to escape the world, but to understand the invisible architecture that shapes how you perceive it. Jung's ideas aren't just concepts to consider, they are doorways into yourself. Each one reveals another layer of the vast interior landscape that most people never consciously explore. In our modern age, we live almost entirely on the surface. We scroll through other people's lives. We respond to notifications. We consume content, chase achievements, and measure ourselves against external metrics. The entire machinery of contemporary life is designed to keep you looking outward, comparing, performing, forgetting that beneath all this noise, beneath the persona you present to the world, there exists an entire universe within you. Jung recognized this disconnection more than a century ago. Even then, he saw that modern people were becoming strangers to their own depths. As technology accelerated, as traditional religious frameworks collapsed, as the world became increasingly rationalized and materialistic, people lost contact with the symbolic, mythic dimension of existence. They lost the language of dreams. They forgot how to read their own inner lives. But the psyche doesn't disappear just because we ignore it. The unconscious doesn't cease its operations because we're too busy to listen. It continues to dream to compensate, to send messages through symptoms, through compulsions, through the very patterns we keep repeating, without understanding why. Jung understood that these weren't just problems. They were communications. The psyche was trying to tell us something essential, if only we would learn its language. This is what makes psychology for sleep so powerful as a practice. In the quiet hours before sleep, when the ego's defenses naturally soften, when the day's demands release their grip, the unconscious becomes more accessible. The threshold between waking and sleeping is where Jung himself did some of his most profound inner work. It's where dreams begin to speak. It's where symbols emerge. It's where you might catch a glimpse of the vast intelligence operating beneath your conscious awareness. Throughout history, from ancient shamans to medieval mystics, from philosophers to poets, humans have recognized that consciousness is only one mode of being. There are other ways of knowing, intuitive, symbolic, mythic ways that our ancestors understood intimately, but that modern culture has largely forgotten. Jung spent his life recovering this ancient wisdom and translating it into psychological language that could be understood scientifically without losing its essential mystery. We will explore tonight how Jung mapped the structure of the psyche itself, the conscious ego, the personal unconscious, and beneath that, the vast collective unconscious that all humans share. We'll meet the archetypal figures that live in these depths, the shadow you've spent your life trying to hide, the contrasexual opposite that dwells within the wise guide and the trickster, and the many faces of your unlived potential. We'll understand the mechanisms by which the psyche heals itself, how dreams compensate for conscious one-sidedness, how opposites unite through the transcendent function, how symbols serve as bridges between the known and unknown parts of yourself. We'll trace Jung's revolutionary insights from his personal confrontation with the unconscious documented in the Red Book, to his lifelong work helping others navigate their own journeys toward wholeness. And will confront directly and unflinchingly what Jung demands of those who would truly engage with his psychology. Not intellectual understanding, but actual transformation. Not collecting concepts, but confronting your own unconscious material. Not studying the psyche, but participating in your own individuation. That slow, difficult, necessary process of becoming who you actually are beneath all the masks you wear. This is psychology for sleep. In the deepest sense, not just information to relax you, but wisdom to transform you. Ideas that work on you even as you drift away. Seeds planted in the fertile soil of the unconscious mind that may blossom into insight when you wake. Jung believed the psyche is always working toward wholeness, always attempting to integrate what has been split off, always calling you toward a more complete version of yourself. So settle in. Let your body release the day's tensions. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let the boundary between waking and sleeping become porous. What follows is not simply a lecture on Jungian psychology. It is an invitation to encounter the living reality of your own depths, to recognize that everything Jung discovered in the collective unconscious is also present in you, waiting to be acknowledged, integrated, and lived. The journey begins here at the threshold between consciousness and the vast darkness that holds both terror and treasure. Jung walked this path first and left maps. But every person must make the journey themselves. No one can do your inner work for you. No one can face your shadow but you. No one can become who you are except you. The world inside you is calling. It has been calling your entire life. Perhaps tonight, in the space between waking and sleep, you might finally begin to listen. If you were to dig beneath the foundation of your personal history, beneath your childhood memories, beneath your forgotten experiences, beneath everything that makes you uniquely you, you would eventually hit bedrock. But this bedrock is not empty. It is not nothing. It is in Jung's conception, the collective unconscious, the inherited psychic substrate that every human being shares regardless of culture, geography, or time period. This is perhaps Jung's most radical and profound contribution to psychology for sleep and waking life alike. He proposed that the human psyche is not a blank slate, shaped only by personal experience. Beneath the personal unconscious, which contains your repressed memories and forgotten experiences, lies something far older and more universal, a layer of the psyche that you didn't create through your own life, but inherited through your humanity itself. The collective unconscious is not learned. It is not cultural. It is not transmitted through language or teaching. It is an a priori structure built into the very architecture of what it means to have a human mind. Think of it as the psychological equivalent of the human body's structure, just as every human is born with the same basic anatomical blueprint: heart, lungs, brain, nervous system, regardless of where or when they're born. Jung believed every human is born with the same basic psychic blueprint. This blueprint manifests not as specific memories or experiences, but as potentials, as organizational patterns, as what Jung called archetypes. These are not images themselves, but rather the predisposition to form certain types of images, to respond to certain situations in recognizable ways, to organize experience according to universal patterns. Consider how all human cultures, separated by vast distances and having no contact with each other, developed similar myths. The hero's journey appears in Greek mythology, in indigenous American stories, in Asian legends, in African folk tales. The great mother figure, nurturing yet potentially devouring, appears everywhere. The wise old man, the trickster, the divine child, the shadow adversary. These figures recur with remarkable consistency across human cultures and throughout human history. Jung asked the question that other psychologists ignored. Why? Why do humans everywhere dream similar symbols? Why do certain images, snakes, water, mountains, descents into darkness, carry similar psychological weight across cultures that never influenced each other? His answer: because these patterns emerge from a shared psychic substrate, from the collective unconscious that all humans inherit simply by being human. This is not mysticism, though it may sound mystical. Jung grounded his observations in empirical work with thousands of patients over decades of clinical practice. He noticed that his patients would dream of symbols they couldn't possibly have learned, ancient alchemical imagery, religious motifs from traditions they'd never studied, mythological figures from cultures they knew nothing about. These images arose spontaneously from within, suggesting they were not acquired, but innate, not learned, but inherited. For those seeking psychology for sleep and transformation, this understanding is foundational. It means that your dreams are not just personal, they speak a universal language. The symbols that emerge when you close your eyes and descend into sleep are not random, but meaningful drawing from this deep well of human psychological experience that connects you to every person who has ever lived. The collective unconscious is why certain stories, certain films, certain characters resonate so powerfully across different audiences. They touch something universal. They activate archetypal patterns that everyone recognizes on some deep pre-verbal level. You don't have to understand why a particular image moves you. The recognition happens beneath conscious awareness in the depths where the collective unconscious operates. Jung distinguished carefully between the personal unconscious and this deeper layer. Your personal unconscious contains your individual history, the events you've forgotten, the emotions you've repressed, the experiences that shaped you, but that you no longer consciously remember. This material is retrievable through memory, through therapy, through conscious excavation. It is yours alone, shaped by your unique life circumstances. But the collective unconscious contains something different, the universal forms of human experience itself. Not specific memories, but the patterns by which humans everywhere organize experience. Not your mother, but the archetype of mother. Not your personal struggles, but the universal pattern of the hero's journey. Not your individual shadow, but the principle of shadow itself. That which is rejected and repressed in service of conscious identity. This distinction matters because it means you are never only dealing with your personal history. Beneath your individual neurosis lies a universal pattern. Beneath your specific suffering lies an archetypal situation that humans have faced since consciousness first emerged from the animal kingdom. You are part of something larger, something older, something that gives your individual experience connection to the great sweep of human psychological development. When you dream, you don't just dream your personal concerns. You dream from this deeper level as well. Your dreams draw from the collective library of human symbolic experience. They speak not just about your day, but about your life's deepest questions. They connect your individual situation to universal patterns of meaning, offering guidance from a wisdom far older than your ego's understanding. This is what Jung meant when he said the unconscious is prospective, not just regressive. It doesn't only look backward to childhood trauma, as Freud emphasized. It also looks forward, pointing toward potential, toward development, toward what you might become if you follow the individuation path. The collective unconscious contains not just the sediment of the past, but the seeds of the future, archetypal potentials waiting to be realized in your individual life. For psychology for sleep practices, this means every night when you close your eyes, you are not just shutting down consciousness. You are opening to this deeper dimension. The boundary between ego consciousness and the collective unconscious becomes thin in the twilight state between waking and sleeping. This is when archetypal dreams can emerge with particular clarity. This is when the psyche might show you something beyond your personal concerns, something universal and profound. Jung didn't invent the collective unconscious. He discovered it, or rather, he gave psychological language to something humans have always known through religion, through mythology, through ritual practices that connect the individual to the transpersonal dimension of existence. What shamans called the spirit world, what mystics called the divine realm, what religions called heaven or the soul's journey. These were different languages for the same psychological reality. Jung identified that human consciousness is rooted in something much larger than the individual ego. To understand Jungian psychology is to understand that you are not isolated. You are not merely the product of your personal history. You are connected through the very structure of your psyche to every human who has ever lived. The depths of your unconscious mind connect to depths that are universal. In your dreams, in your fantasies, in your deepest psychological experiences, you touch something timeless and shared. This is both humbling and empowering. Humbling, because it means the ego is not the center of the psyche. Your conscious identity is just the tip of a vast iceberg, most of which remains below the surface. But empowering, because it means you have access to a wisdom greater than your personal experience, a guidance system built into the very structure of the psyche that has been helping humans navigate existence for hundreds of thousands of years. Jung's conception of the collective unconscious, while revolutionary in modern psychological terms, actually echoed insights that philosophers and spiritual traditions had recognized for millennia. He wasn't inventing a new idea, so much as rediscovering an ancient truth in scientific language. Understanding this historical lineage helps us appreciate that psychology for sleep and depth isn't merely contemporary self-help, but rather participation in humanity's oldest quest, knowing thyself. In ancient Greece, Plato proposed the theory of forum's eternal perfect templates that exist in a realm beyond the material world. Every beautiful thing in the physical world, Plato argued, is beautiful because it participates in the eternal form of beauty itself. Every instance of courage reflects the eternal form of courage. For Plato, the soul had access to this realm of forms before birth, and learning was actually remembering what the soul already knew. While Jung's collective unconscious is psychological rather than metaphysical, the parallel is striking. Both propose that humans have innate access to universal patterns. Both suggest that knowledge emerges from within rather than being solely acquired from without. Both recognize that behind the multiplicity of individual experiences lies a unity of universal patterns. Plato's forms and Jung's archetypes are different languages for a similar insight that human consciousness is structured by patterns that transcend individual experience. As Western civilization moved through the medieval period, this recognition took religious form. Christian mysticism, particularly in the writings of Meister Eckhart and other contemplatives, described a ground of being, what Eckhart called the Godhead, that was deeper than the personal ego. Mystics spoke of losing the personal self to find union with something universal and divine. They described the soul as containing depths that connect to the divine ground of all existence. Jung, though not religious in conventional terms, recognized that these mystical experiences pointed toward psychological realities. What mystics called union with God might be psychological union with the self, the totality of the psyche that includes but transcends the ego, What they call divine grace might be the healing power of the unconscious when the ego stops resisting and allows deeper forces to work. Medieval mysticism in Jung's reading was describing psychological transformation in theological language. During the Enlightenment, even as rational philosophy seemed to move away from such mystical conceptions, certain thinkers maintained the insight that consciousness rests on something deeper and universal. Immanuel Kant proposed that the mind has innate categories of understanding structures built into cognition itself that shape how we perceive reality. Space-time causality. These weren't learned from experience, but were the preconditions that make experience possible. Again, while Kant's epistemology differs from Jung's psychology, the structural insight is similar. The mind is not passive, but active, not empty, but structured, not individual, but universal in its fundamental organization. Kant's categories of understanding and Jung's collective unconscious both propose that humans share fundamental cognitive patterns that shape how reality appears to consciousness. The Romantic movement of the 19th century brought this recognition back from abstract philosophy to lived experience. Poets and philosophers like Schopenhauer emphasized that beneath conscious rationality lies something deeper, more powerful, more fundamental. Schopenhauer called it the will, a blind driving force that underlies all existence, and that individual consciousness is merely a surface manifestation of. While Jung rejected Schopenhauer's pessimism, he absorbed the insight that consciousness emerges from unconscious depths, that the ego is not the author of the psyche, but rather its late arriving guest. Romantic philosophy recognized what religious traditions had always known, that the rational conscious mind is a recent development, and beneath it lie older, deeper forces that shape human existence in ways the ego can barely comprehend. This brings us to Jung himself, who in 1913 experienced a profound psychological crisis after his break with Sigmund Freud. For several years, Jung underwent what he later called his confrontation with the unconscious, a period of intense inner experience documented in his private Red Book. He experienced visions, engaged in dialogues with inner figures, and encountered archetypal imagery that seemed to emerge from a source deeper than his personal psyche. Rather than dismissing these experiences as pathological, Jung studied them. He recognized that the figures appearing in his visions, Elia, Salome, Philemon, and others, were not inventions of his conscious mind, but autonomous contents emerging from unconscious depths. They behaved as if they had their own intelligence, their own perspective, their own message to convey. This led Jung to his core realization. The unconscious is not just a repository of repressed personal material, but an active, creative, intelligent presence that contains wisdom the conscious ego does not possess. From this personal experience, Jung developed his entire mature psychology. The archetypes, the collective unconscious, the individuation process, acts of imagination, all emerged from his willingness to take seriously what psychology had dismissed as mere fantasy or pathology. Jung recognized that these inner experiences connected him to something universal. The figures he encountered, the symbols that appeared, the patterns that unfolded, these were not his alone, but belonged to humanity's common psychological heritage. Modern neuroscience, while using completely different language and methodology, has begun to validate aspects of Jung's insights. Research into pattern recognition, Evolutionary psychology and universal emotional responses suggests that humans do share certain innate psychological structures. The way infants respond to faces, the universal grammar underlying all languages, the cross-cultural similarity of emotional expressions, all point towards something built into human psychology, rather than acquired through individual learning. This doesn't mean Jung was right in every detail, but it suggests that his core insight that human psychology has universal structural components aligns with what we're discovering through contemporary research. The collective unconscious may not exist as Jung imagined it, but something like it, a shared psychological substrate that shapes human experience in universal ways, appears increasingly supported by evidence from multiple disciplines. For those engaged in psychology for sleep and personal exploration, this historical validation matters because it suggests you're not just playing with interesting ideas. You're engaging with insights that humanity's deepest thinkers have recognized across cultures and centuries. When you work with your dreams, when you encounter archetypal symbols, when you feel connected to something larger than your personal story, you're touching the same reality that mystics described, that philosophers theorized, and that Jung mapped psychologically. The collective unconscious would remain abstract without understanding how it manifests in individual experience. This is where archetypes become essential to Jungian psychology for sleep and transformation. Archetypes are not stored images or inherited memories. They are instead organizing principles, patterns of meaning, psychological instincts that shape how humans perceive, behave, and construct experience. Think of archetypes as psychological organs, analogous to physical organs. You aren't born with specific knowledge in your brain, but you are born with a brain structured to acquire language, to recognize faces, to respond to danger. Similarly, you aren't born with specific archetypal images, but you are born with archetypal potentials, predispositions to organize experience in certain universal ways. The mother archetype, for instance, is not a specific image of your personal mother or of any particular mother. It's the psychological pattern by which humans everywhere recognize and respond to maternal qualities: nurturance, protection, sustenance, unconditional care. This pattern can be activated by your actual mother, but it can also be projected onto nature, onto the earth, onto institutions, onto any entity that carries those maternal qualities. The archetype is the pattern. The specific manifestation varies. This is crucial for understanding how archetypes work. They are empty forms that get filled with content from your personal and cultural experience. The hero archetype exists universally. The pattern of an individual leaving the known world facing trials, undergoing transformation, and returning with gifts for the community. But how that pattern manifests varies enormously. Odysseus Buddha, Frodo Baggins. Your own struggle to overcome a personal limitation all express the same archetypal pattern in vastly different ways. Archetypes function as symbolic communication from the unconscious. When an archetype becomes activated in your psyche through a dream, through a powerful emotional experience, through a life transition, it's the unconscious's way of bringing forward the appropriate psychological energy and insight for your current situation. You don't consciously choose which archetypes activate. They emerge spontaneously from the depths, often catching the ego by surprise. For example, in times of crisis or major life transition. The hero archetype frequently activates. You might dream of journeys, battles, quests. You might feel called to undertake something difficult. You might find yourself resonating with heroic narratives in films or books. This isn't coincidence. The psyche is activating the archetypal pattern appropriate to your situation, the pattern of leaving safety, facing the unknown, undergoing transformation. The archetype is preparing you psychologically for the journey you're actually living. Similarly, when facing your own darkness, your denied qualities, your repressed capacities, the shadow archetype activates. You might project it outward, seeing your own rejected qualities in others whom you judge or fear. Or you might begin to dream of dark figures, threatening presences, aspects of yourself that have been banished from conscious awareness. The archetype is trying to bring forward what needs to be integrated. The wise old man or wise old woman often appears when you need guidance, when the ego's resources are exhausted, when you've reached the limit of your conscious understanding. This archetype carries the wisdom of the ages, the perspective that comes from beyond the ego's limited viewpoint. In dreams, this figure might appear as a teacher, a guide, a mysterious stranger who offers cryptic but crucial advice. The appearance of this archetype suggests that the unconscious is ready to provide guidance if the ego is willing to listen. The trickster archetype emerges when consciousness has become too rigid, too one-sided, too certain of itself. This is the disruptive force that undermines plans, exposes contradictions, reveals pretensions. The trickster appears as accidents, slips, mistakes, coincidences that seem designed to humble the ego and shake up established patterns. While frustrating to the conscious mind, the trickster serves the important function of preventing psychological stagnation. Understanding archetypes as functional patterns rather than mere symbols transforms how you relate to your inner life. Your dreams aren't random. They're presenting archetypal scenarios relevant to your psychological development. Your emotional reactions to people aren't just personal. They may indicate archetypal projections, seeing the great mother, or terrible father, or idealized lover in someone who is actually just human. Your life's narrative isn't unique. It follows archetypal patterns that billions of humans have lived before you, which is precisely what gives your individual story universal meaning and significance. Research in various fields has begun to identify psychological universals that align with Jung's archetypal theory. Attachment theory describes universal patterns of infant caregiver bonding that shape personality development, essentially describing the mother archetype in contemporary developmental language. Evolutionary psychology identifies adaptive patterns of behavior that would have been selected for in ancestral environments, patterns remarkably similar to what Jung described as archetypal. Cross-cultural studies of mythology reveal striking similarities in narrative patterns, character types, and symbolic meanings across societies with no historical contact. Precisely what you'd expect if Jung was correct about archetypal patterns being universal rather than culturally transmitted. The fact that Hollywood films using archetypal storytelling patterns resonate with audiences worldwide suggests these patterns tap into something genuinely universal in human psychology. For psychology, for sleep practices, Understanding archetypes means recognizing that your nighttime dreams and daytime life are both expressing these deeper patterns. When you dream, you're not just processing daily events, you're engaging with archetypal dimensions of human experience. The figures in your dreams may have personal associations, but they also carry archetypal energy that connects your individual experience to universal human patterns. This recognition can be profoundly liberating. Your struggles aren't merely personal failures, they're expressions of archetypal situations that humans have always faced. Your questions aren't uniquely yours, they're versions of questions humanity has wrestled with since consciousness emerged. You're not alone in your psychological journey because the very structure of the psyche connects you to everyone who has ever lived and struggled and sought meaning. But this recognition also carries responsibility. If archetypes are real psychological forces, then they must be related to consciously rather than being possessed by unconsciously. An archetypal possession occurs when someone identifies completely with an archetypal pattern, believing they are the hero, the victim, the savior, the rebel, and loses their individual humanity in the process. The archetype takes over, and the person becomes a caricature, a walking stereotype, lost in archetypal inflation. The task of individuation, which we'll explore more deeply later, involves relating to archetypes without being consumed by them. You recognize their presence. You learn their language. You honor their power. But you maintain your individual consciousness, your ability to choose your autonomy. You become the one who can work with archetypal energies rather than being unconsciously driven by them. To navigate Jung's psychology for sleep and transformation requires understanding the distinction between two critical structures, the ego and the self. This isn't just theoretical hair splitting. It's the foundation for everything else Jung taught about psychological development and healing. The ego is the center of your conscious identity. It's the osa, the I, that thinks, chooses, acts, and perceives. It's your sense of continuity across time, the recognition that the person who woke up this morning is the same person who went to sleep last night. The ego gives you agency, responsibility, and the capacity to function in the world. Without a functioning ego, you would have no stable identity, no capacity for intentional action, no ability to navigate daily life. Jung emphasized that the ego is necessary. Some spiritual traditions speak of ego death or ego dissolution as the goal. Jung disagreed. The ego must be strong enough to undertake the work of individuation, strong enough to face the unconscious without being overwhelmed, strong enough to integrate difficult psychological material. A weak ego doesn't lead to enlightenment. It leads to psychosis, to fragmentation, to inability to function. But, and this is crucial, the ego is not the totality of the psyche. It's just one component and not even the central one. The ego is like the captain of a ship who believes he's the entire vessel. In reality, the ship the psyche includes the captain ego, the crew, conscious, functions a cargo hold, personal unconscious, and the ocean itself, collective unconscious. The captain needs to be competent, but he's deluded if he thinks he's the whole reality. The self, by contrast, is the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, personal and collective, known and unknown. The self is both the center and the circumference of the psyche. It's what you were born as your complete psychological potential. and what you might become if you fully individuate the realization of that potential. The self is always present, but it's mostly unconscious, mostly unrealized, mostly potential, rather than actual. Think of it this way. The ego is what you know yourself to be right now. The self is what you actually are, the full scope of your psychological being, most of which remains unconscious. The ego is aware of itself. The self includes the ego, but also everything the ego doesn't know about itself. Everything hidden in shadow. Everything projected onto others. Everything potential that hasn't yet been actualized. The relationship between ego and self is the dynamic that drives psychological development. The self is constantly trying to express itself, to become conscious, to manifest its full potential. It sends dreams, creates symptoms, arranges synchronicities, activates archetypes, all in service of guiding the ego toward greater wholeness. The ego's task is to recognize these communications and respond to them, rather than remaining locked in its limited perspective. In the first half of life, the ego necessarily focuses outward. It builds identity, develops competence, establishes itself in the world. This is appropriate and necessary. The young person needs to develop a strong ego capable of functioning effectively. But somewhere around midlife, often triggered by crisis or profound dissatisfaction, attention begins to turn inward. The ego starts questioning its achievements, its identity, its values. This is the self calling, inviting the ego to begin the second half of life's task, individuation, the process of becoming whole. Many people resist this call. They try to maintain the first half of life agenda, more achievement, more identity, reinforcement, more external validation. But the psyche won't cooperate indefinitely. Symptoms emerge: depression, anxiety, addiction, somatic illness, relationship crisis. These aren't just problems. They're the self's way of insisting that something needs to change, that the ego's current orientation is insufficient, that a deeper process is trying to unfold. For those engaged in psychology, for sleep and inner work, understanding this distinction transforms how you relate to your own psychological experience. The thoughts and feelings you experience aren't the whole truth about you. They're the ego's current perspective, which is necessarily limited. Dreams and symbols that seem alien or strange aren't random. They're communications from the self offering perspectives and insights that the ego doesn't have access to. Jung often spoke of the self using religious language as the God within, the divine spark, the imago Dei. He wasn't being mystical. He was recognizing that what religious traditions called the soul, or the divine presence within, is psychologically real. The self functions like an inner guide, an organizing center that holds more wisdom than the ego possesses. Relating to the self feels like relating to something greater than yourself, because it's the totality of your psyche, of which your conscious ego is just one part. In dreams, the self often appears symbolically as mandalas, circles, suggesting wholeness and integration, as wise figures, as light or radiant presences, as powerful natural forces. These dream images aren't just psychological. They represent the self trying to communicate its presence to the ego, trying to call consciousness toward greater wholeness and integration, A healthy ego-self relationship is characterized by dialogue rather than dominance. The ego doesn't try to control the unconscious, and the unconscious doesn't overwhelm the ego. Instead, there's a back and forth, a conversation, a gradual process of the ego, learning to honor the self's guidance while maintaining its own necessary functions. This dialogue is what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity of the psyche to unite conscious and unconscious perspectives into a new, more comprehensive understanding. Many modern people suffer from what Jung called ego inflation, the ego believing it's the whole psyche, the conscious mind, thinking it's in complete control. This inflation makes people rigid, controlling, cut off from their own depths. They live entirely on the surface, identified with their achievements, their persona, their conscious beliefs. The unconscious then has to create increasingly dramatic symptoms to get attention. The opposite problem is ego dissolution, when the ego is too weak to maintain its boundaries and gets flooded by unconscious content. This can happen through psychosis, through overwhelming trauma, or through certain spiritual practices undertaken without adequate preparation. Without a strong ego to relate to the unconscious, there's no integration, just chaos. Jung's goal was ego self-access, a strong ego that maintains its functions while remaining open to the self's communications. The ego that can say, I don't know everything about myself. I'll listen to what dreams reveal. I'll consider that my reactions might be projections. I'll allow that there's wisdom deeper than my conscious understanding. This is ego maturity, strength plus humility, capability plus openness. For psychology for sleep, this means approaching rest not as shutting down consciousness, but as opening to the self. In sleep, the ego relaxes its control. The boundary between conscious and unconscious becomes permeable. The self can communicate through dreams, through hypnagogic imagery, through the subtle shifts in mood and perspective that occur in twilight consciousness. This is why people throughout history have sought wisdom in dreams, because in sleep, the ego steps aside and deeper wisdom can emerge. If you're honest with yourself, truly honest, you know there are parts of you that you work very hard to hide, not just from others, but from yourself. Qualities you judge harshly when you see them in other people. Impulses you suppress before they fully form into conscious thoughts. Emotions you've learned are unacceptable, and so pushed down before they can be felt. This rejected material, everything the ego refuses to acknowledge as me, forms what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is not evil, though it contains what you consider negative about yourself. It's simply everything that doesn't fit the image you've constructed of who you are supposed to be. For psychology, for sleep, and genuine transformation, understanding your shadow isn't optional. It's the cornerstone of all deeper work. Shadow formation begins early, usually in childhood. You're born whole with a full range of human capacities, aggression and tenderness, selfishness and generosity, sexuality and innocence, confidence and vulnerability. But you quickly learn that some of these qualities are acceptable while others are not. Your family has rules about what emotions can be expressed. Your culture has norms about what behaviors are rewarded. Your gender is expected to display certain traits while suppressing others. So you adapt. You learn to show what gains approval and hide what brings shame or punishment. The boy learns to hide his tears and develop toughness. The girl learns to hide her anger and develop niceness. The sensitive child in a rough family learns to hide vulnerability. The creative child in a conventional family learns to hide imagination. Whatever doesn't fit gets split off from conscious identity and relegated to the shadow. But here's what most people don't understand. The shadow doesn't just contain traits that are genuinely destructive. It also contains immense positive potential qualities that were discouraged not because they were bad, but because they threatened the status quo or made others uncomfortable. Jung famously said, "The shadow is 90% pure gold." What he meant is that, alongside the rage, envy, and selfishness you've repressed, you've also buried your power, your creativity, your authenticity, your capacity for joy. Consider someone raised in a family that valued intellectual achievement above all else. They might shadow their playfulness, their sensuality, their capacity for spontaneous fun, not because these qualities are bad, but because they didn't fit the family's narrow definition of worthiness. Or someone raised to always put others first might shadow their healthy self-interest, their ability to say no, their capacity to prioritize their own needs, leaving them chronically depleted and resentful. The shadow operates through several key mechanisms, all of which keep you from seeing yourself clearly. The most common is projection. Unable to acknowledge certain qualities in yourself, you instead see them in others. The person who judges others as selfish is often denying their own legitimate self-interest. The person who sees others as weak is often afraid of their own vulnerability. The person who despises fakeness in others is often performing a persona that isn't genuine. Jung put it bluntly, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When you have an intense emotional reaction to someone, especially disproportionate to what they actually did, it's worth asking, am I seeing my own shadow? Am I encountering in them what I've disowned in myself? The shadow also manifests in dreams. It often appears as a figure of the same gender as the dreamer, but with qualities the dreamer rejects. The scary pursuer in a nightmare, the primitive figure, the criminal, the despised person. These dream characters often represent shadow material trying to become conscious. Rather than being threats, they're actually invitations to reclaim disowned parts of yourself. In waking life, shadow erupts in moments when you're not in control, when you're tired, stressed, drunk, or caught off guard. Suddenly you say something cruel you didn't mean. You act in a way that contradicts your self-image. You feel an emotion that horrifies you. These aren't aberrations. They're shadow material breaking through the ego's defenses, revealing what you've been keeping hidden, even from yourself. For psychology, for sleep and depth, work shadow exploration is essential because as long as the shadow remains unconscious, it controls you. It sabotages your relationships through projection. It drains your energy through repression. It limits your capacity because whatever you hide from yourself becomes unavailable to you. The aggressive capacity you shadow is the same energy needed for healthy assertion. The selfishness you reject is the same capacity needed for appropriate self-care. Jung emphasized that shadow work is not about acting out every impulse. It's about making the shadow conscious, acknowledging it, understanding it, integrating it in mature ways. The rage you've repressed doesn't need to be unleashed destructively, but it does need to be recognized, felt, and understood. Then its energy can be channeled into healthy boundary setting, into passion for justice, into the capacity to say no to what violates you. The process of shadow integration typically follows stages. First comes recognition, beginning to see that the qualities you judge harshly in others might exist in you too. This is uncomfortable. The ego resists admitting what it's worked so hard to deny. But with honesty and courage, recognition gradually dawns. Second comes ownership, moving from, I might have some of that, to, I do have that, it's part of me. This is where the real work happens. You stop externalizing your darkness and take responsibility for it. You admit your capacity for cruelty, for selfishness, for weakness, for whatever you've been denying. Paradoxically, this admission often brings relief. The exhausting effort of maintaining an idealized self-image can finally relax. Third comes understanding, asking why this quality was repressed, what need it was serving, what legitimate function it has. Often you discover that what you thought was purely negative actually has a positive core. The selfishness you condemned might be healthy self-preservation. The aggression you feared might be necessary strength. The neediness you despised might be the legitimate human need for connection. Fourth comes integration, finding mature ways to express shadow qualities rather than either repressing them or being overtaken by them. The person who integrates their shadow doesn't become cruel or selfish. They become whole. They can access their full range of human capacities using each appropriately for the situation. Contemporary research in psychology supports Jung's insights about the shadow, though in different language. Studies on implicit bias reveal that people hold attitudes they consciously reject. Research on defense mechanisms shows how we protect self-image through denial projection and rationalization. Work on moral licensing demonstrates how acting virtuously in one domain can paradoxically lead to unethical behavior in another, because we're maintaining an idealized self-image, rather than honestly facing our full complexity. For those engaged in psychology, for sleep work, shadow material often emerges in that transitional state between waking and sleeping. As conscious control relaxes, as the ego's defenses soften, shadow content can surface. Uncomfortable thoughts, disturbing images, emotions you usually suppress. Rather than pushing these away, Jung would encourage you to pay attention. What is trying to become conscious? What have you been refusing to see? The promise of shadow work is profound. When you stop splitting yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts, when you can acknowledge your full humanity, something shifts. You become more genuine. Your relationships become more real because you're not constantly projecting. Your energy increases because you're no longer exhausting yourself through repression. You access capacities you didn't know you had because they were locked in shadow. Jung believed that the confrontation with the shadow is the apprentice piece of individuation, the beginning of the journey toward wholeness. You can't integrate what you won't acknowledge. You can't become whole while remaining divided against yourself. The shadow is not your enemy. It's simply the part of you that's been waiting in the dark to be seen, accepted, and brought into the light of consciousness. Within every psyche, Jung discovered lives a contrasexual presence, an inner figure representing qualities associated with the opposite sex. He called this thema in men and the animus in women. Understanding these archetypes is crucial for psychology, for sleep and relationship work, as they profoundly influence how we relate to others and to our own inner lives. The anima represents the unconscious feminine dimension within a man. She appears in dreams as female figures, sometimes nurturing and inspiring, sometimes seductive and dangerous, sometimes wise and otherworldly. The anima carries qualities often culturally associated with the feminine emotion: intuition, receptivity, connection to the unconscious, the irrational, and the imaginal. But she's not simply a collection of stereotypes. She's the man's bridge to his own inner life, his capacity for feeling and relationship, his connection to the depths of the psyche. In a man, the anima often manifests initially as mood. When a man becomes inexplicably moody, withdrawn, or emotionally reactive, it's often the anima making her presence known. She represents all the emotional and relational capacities that men in patriarchal cultures are taught to suppress. As a result, many men are possessed by the anima, without knowing it, at the mercy of moods they don't understand, cut off from their own feeling life relating to women through projection rather than genuine encounter. The animus represents the unconscious masculine dimension within a woman. He appears in dreams as male figures, sometimes as protector, and guide, sometimes as harsh critic or dangerous pursuer, sometimes as divine lover or wise teacher. The animus carries qualities often culturally associated with the masculine logic: assertion, conviction, capacity for action, discernment, and connection to principle and meaning. He's the woman's capacity for independent thought, for assertive action, for standing in her own authority. In a woman, the animus often manifests initially as inner voices, authoritative, critical, or inspiring judgments that seem to come from beyond the ego. When a woman is possessed by the animus, she might become rigidly opinionated, argumentative, identified with ideas rather than her own experience, cut off from her feeling values while defending abstract principles. Or she might project the animus outward, seeking in men the authority and strength she hasn't claimed in herself. The danger of these contrasexual archetypes comes when they remain unconscious and therefore projected. A man projects his anima onto actual women, falling in love not with the real person, but with his own inner feminine ideal. He sees her as the source of all meaning, all emotional depth, all connection to soul, not recognizing that what he's really encountering is his own unlived inner life projected onto her. When she inevitably fails to be his savior, or muse, or soulmate fantasy, he becomes disillusioned, blaming her for not being what she never was. Similarly, a woman might project her animus onto actual men, attributing to them the strength, wisdom, or authority she hasn't developed in herself. She might become dependent on men for her sense of direction and purpose, or she might relate to them through argumentativeness and power struggle her animus, fighting with their animus, while genuine human contact remains impossible. For psychology, for sleep and relationship healing, withdrawing these projections is essential. This doesn't mean denying real differences between people or pretending that biological sex has no psychological dimensions. It means recognizing that the qualities you seek in a partner often represent your own undeveloped potential. The man who is mesmerized by a woman's emotional depth needs to ask, where is my own emotional depth? The woman who is drawn to a man's decisiveness needs to ask, where is my own capacity for decisive action? Jung believed that individuation requires integrating the contrasexual archetype men, developing their capacity for feeling relationship and connection to the unconscious. Women developing their capacity for assertion, independent thought, and standing in their own authority. This doesn't mean becoming androgynous or denying one's gender. It means becoming whole, accessing the full range of human capacities rather than remaining split into masculine and feminine stereotypes. The anima develops through stages in a man's life. Initially, she might appear as Eve, the purely biological and primitive feminine. Then, as Helen, the romantic and aesthetic feminine, the muse and beloved. Then, as Mary, the spiritual and devoted feminine, the Virgin Mother. Finally, as Sophia Wisdom herself, the guide to the depths of the psyche. Each stage represents a deepening relationship between a man and his own inner feminine nature. Similarly, the animus develops through stages in a woman's life. Initially, he might appear as the embodiment of physical power and strength, then as the romantic hero or man of action, then as the professor or spiritual teacher, the bearer of wisdom and meaning. Finally, as Hermes, the psychopomp, the guide who mediates between conscious and unconscious, helping her navigate her own depths. In relationships, recognizing anima and animus projections can be transformative. Instead of demanding that your partner carry your unlived qualities, you begin to develop them yourself. The man learns to access his own emotional intelligence rather than depending on his partner to do all the feeling for both of them. The woman learns to access her own authority and direction rather than expecting her partner to provide all the strength and conviction. This doesn't make relationships less important. It makes them more real. When two people can meet as whole individuals rather than as projections, genuine love becomes possible love for the actual person rather than for the fantasy of what they might provide. Jung believed that the integration of anima and animus was essential preparation for meaningful relationship. Only when you've encountered your own inner opposite can you truly see another person clearly. For contemporary psychology, for sleep practitioners, anima and animus often appear in dreams during times of relationship difficulty or when inner balance needs attention. Dream figures of the opposite sex might carry messages about your own undeveloped capacities. The beautiful woman who appears to a man might be inviting him to embrace beauty, feeling, or connection to soul. The powerful man who appears to a woman might be calling her to claim her own power and authority. Active imagination, consciously dialoguing with these inner figures, can be particularly powerful. Rather than being possessed by anima moods or animus opinions, you can enter into conversation with them, asking what they want, what they represent, what they're trying to bring into consciousness. This transforms the relationship from possession to partnership, from being controlled by unconscious forces to consciously collaborating with them. At the center of Jung's entire psychology for sleep and waking life sits one overarching process: individuation. This is not self-improvement. It is not becoming someone else. It is not achieving perfection. Individuation is the journey of becoming who you actually are, integrating all the fragmented, split off, projected, and denied parts of yourself into a coherent whole. Most people never individuate. They live their entire lives identified with a partial version of themselves. The ego's narrow self image, the persona they present to the world, the expectations they've internalized from family and culture. They remain divided against themselves, split into conscious and unconscious, acceptable and unacceptable living on the surface, while their depths remain unexplored. Individuation is the opposite of this divided state. It's a gradual, often painful, always demanding process of encountering everything. You are the light and the shadow, the conscious and the unconscious, the personal and the collective, and integrating it all into a unified identity, rooted in the self, rather than just the ego. Jung emphasized that individuation is not chosen consciously by the ego. It's a natural unfolding of the psyche itself, a teleological process hardwired into human psychological development. The acorn becomes the oak not through effort, but through following its inherent nature. Similarly, the psyche moves toward wholeness, not because you decide to, but because that's what psyches do when they're not blocked by repression, defense, or ego inflation. However, while the impulse toward individuation is natural, the conscious participation in it is not automatic. Most people resist it. The ego prefers the comfort of its known identity, even if that identity is false or limited. The persona prefers the approval it receives for conforming, even if conformity means betraying your authentic self. The unconscious content that needs integration is often terrifying to the ego, so easier to keep it buried. This is why individuation typically begins with crisis. Something breaks down, the persona can't be maintained. A major life transition occurs, depression or anxiety becomes unbearable, or a powerful dream demands attention. The psyche forces the issue. The self insists on being heard. The unconscious will no longer cooperate with the ego's avoidance strategies. For those engaged in psychology for sleep and inner work, recognizing when individuation is calling you is crucial. The signs include chronic dissatisfaction, despite external success, feeling like you're living someone else's life, recurring dreams with powerful symbols, synchronicities that seem too meaningful to ignore, relationships that keep triggering the same unresolved patterns, or a growing sense that something essential is missing despite having everything you thought you wanted. The individuation process follows a general pattern, though each person's journey is unique. First comes the confrontation with a persona, recognizing that the social mask you wear is not who you are. This can be devastating. Your entire identity might be built on being the good child, the successful professional, the caring helper, the strong protector. Individuation requires seeing through these roles to the person underneath who has needs, limits, and authentic desires that don't match the persona's performance. Second comes the encounter with the shadow, facing everything you've denied about yourself, both negative and positive. As we explored earlier, this is the apprentice piece of individuation. You cannot become whole while remaining split against yourself. The shadow must be acknowledged, understood, and integrated. This doesn't mean acting out every repressed impulse. It means conscious assimilation, recognizing these qualities as yours, understanding their function, finding mature ways to express them. Third comes withdrawal of projections. recognizing that what you see in others often reflects your own unconscious material. The people you idealize carry your unlived potential. The people you despise carry your disowned shadow. The relationships that trigger you most intensely are showing you what needs attention within yourself. As projections are withdrawn, your perception of others becomes clearer and you reclaim the psychological energy that was bound up in projection. Fourth comes the integration of anima or animus, developing the contrasexual qualities within yourself rather than seeking them exclusively in others. Men develop their capacity for relationship feeling and connection to the unconscious. Women develop their capacity for assertion, independent thought, and principled action. Both move toward wholeness rather than remaining confined to gender stereotype fragments of the full human range. Fifth comes the relativization of the ego, recognizing that the ego is not the center of the psyche, but rather one component of a larger system. The ego learns humility. It learns to listen to dreams, to honor the unconscious, to cooperate with the self's guidance, rather than demanding total control. This is where many spiritual traditions and Jungian psychology converge. The ego must die as center of the psyche so that the self can be born as the true organizing center. Finally comes the realization of the self, a state of inner unity where conscious and unconscious, personal and collective have been integrated to the degree possible in a human lifetime. This is not a final achievement, but an ongoing process. Jung was clear that individuation is never complete. It's a direction, not a destination. You move toward wholeness without ever fully arriving. Contemporary psychology validates many of Jung's insights about individuation, though using different terminology. Developmental psychology recognizes that psychological growth continues across the lifespan, with distinct tasks and challenges at different life stages. Object relations theory describes how early fragmentation must be gradually integrated for mature functioning. Attachment research shows how insecure patterns must be made conscious and revised for healthy relationships. For psychology, for sleep work specifically, individuation often accelerates during the liminal time between waking and sleeping. The ego's defenses relax. The boundary between conscious and unconscious becomes permeable. The self can send messages through hypnagogic imagery, through insights that arrive just before sleep or just after waking, through dreams that carry profound symbolic guidance. Many of Jung's most important insights came to him in this threshold state. Individuation is not a comfortable process. Jung emphasized its difficulty and loneliness. You will be misunderstood. The people who knew you in your old identity may not recognize or appreciate your transformation. Relationships built on your persona may not survive your becoming authentic. Cultural expectations may press you back toward conformity. The collective dislikes individuals who individuate because it mirrors their own refusal to undertake the journey. But the alternative is worse. To not individuate is to remain a stranger to yourself, to live someone else's life in your own body, to die without ever discovering who you actually were. Jung put it starkly, nothing worse could happen to one than to be completely understood. To be completely understood by others means you're still performing a comprehensible role. True individuation makes you more mysterious, not less, more unique, more yourself, less reducible to collective categories. For those willing to undertake this journey, what awaits is not happiness in a conventional sense, but meaning, authenticity, and wholeness. You become capable of genuine relationship because you're no longer desperately seeking in others what you lack in yourself. You become capable of creative work because you're expressing your authentic nature rather than imitating others. You become capable of facing suffering because you're rooted in something deeper than the ego's comfort. Individuation is the work of a lifetime. It doesn't guarantee external success or eliminate pain, but it offers something more valuable: the possibility of living your own life rather than the life others expected of you, the chance to become who you actually are rather than who you thought you should be. One of Jung's most profound insights into psychology for sleep and waking life is that the unconscious is not passive. It doesn't simply store repressed material and wait for therapy to excavate it. The unconscious is dynamically active, constantly responding to the conscious attitude, constantly working to restore balance when consciousness becomes too one-sided. This compensatory function is fundamental to understanding dreams and why paying attention to them matters for psychological health. When your conscious attitude is unbalanced, too rational or too emotional, too extroverted or too introverted, too inflated or too diminished, the unconscious compensates by producing content that reintroduces what's been neglected. Consider someone who identifies strongly with being rational, logical, and in control. Their conscious life is all about analysis, planning, and efficient problem solving. But their dreams might be wildly irrational, full of intense emotions, chaotic situations, incomprehensible symbols. This isn't random. The unconscious is compensating for the one-sided, rational attitude, insisting that emotion chaos and the non-rational have a place in psychological wholeness. Or consider someone who has cultivated an image of themselves as morally superior, always kind, never angry or selfish. Their unconscious might produce dreams of aggressive actions, selfish behavior, morally ambiguous situations. Again, this is compensation. The unconscious is insisting that the shadow qualities being denied in consciousness must be acknowledged. The dream is trying to restore balance to a psyche that's become rigidly identified with one-sided virtue. The compensatory function works in both directions. Someone who is lost in unconscious identification with emotions, unable to think clearly or make decisions, might have dreams of geometric order, of intellectual insight, of decisive action. The unconscious is offering what consciousness lacks. In this case, the structure and clarity needed for balanced functioning. For psychology, for sleep practitioners, this compensatory principle is crucial for dream work. Don't just take dreams at face value. Ask a wadi, what attitude does my conscious life have that this dream might be compensating for? If you dream of death and destruction, when your waking life feels controlled and orderly, the dream might be saying something needs to die. Some old pattern needs to break down, change is necessary, despite your conscious preference for stability. If you dream of beautiful gardens and peaceful scenes, when your waking life is chaotic and stressful, the unconscious might be providing what you need, reminding you of beauty, peace, and growth possibilities that consciousness has lost sight of in the midst of crisis. The dream is therapy offering balance when waking life has become unbalanced. Jung emphasized that the unconscious has a prospective function. as well as a compensatory one. It doesn't just react to current consciousness, it also points forward toward what needs to develop, toward potentials that haven't yet been realized. Dreams can show you problems before consciousness recognizes them. They can reveal solutions you haven't consciously imagined. They can point toward life directions that the ego hasn't considered. This is why many creative people throughout history have found inspiration in dreams and liminal states. The conscious mind has limitations. It works with what it already knows, using established patterns and familiar frameworks. The unconscious can access wider possibilities because it contains more: the collective unconscious, with its archetypal patterns, the personal unconscious, with its forgotten experiences, the self, with its wisdom about your total potential. Modern neuroscience has begun to validate aspects of Jung's compensatory theory, though in different language. Research shows that REM sleep and dreaming are essential for emotional regulation, memory consolidation, and creative problem solving. Dreams help integrate difficult experiences, process emotions that weren't fully dealt with during waking hours, and make connections between ideas that seem unrelated to conscious thought. Studies of problem solving show that people who sleep on a problem often wake with solutions that eluded them before sleep. The brain during sleep is actively working on problems in ways consciousness can't. It's making associations, testing possibilities, reorganizing information. This aligns with Jung's view that the unconscious is intelligently working to support consciousness, not just storing what consciousness rejects. For those engaged in serious psychology, for sleep work, paying attention to the compensatory function means taking dreams seriously as guidance. When you have a recurring dream, it's often because the unconscious is insistently trying to correct a one-sided conscious attitude, and you're not listening. When you have a dream that disturbs you, it's often because the unconscious is insisting you face something consciousness wants to avoid. The compensatory function also explains why ignoring dreams has consequences. When the unconscious's attempts at compensation are consistently ignored, it escalates. First comes dreams, subtle symbolic messages. If those are ignored, comes stronger dreams, nightmares, recurring themes that can't be dismissed. If those are still ignored, come symptoms: anxiety, depression, psychosomatic illness, behavioral acting out. The psyche insists on balance. If consciousness won't cooperate willingly, the unconscious will force the issue. This doesn't mean every dream must be analyzed, or that you should become obsessed with dream interpretation. Jung emphasized that not all dreams are equally significant. Some are just processing daily residue, working through minor events and emotions. But paying attention over time reveals patterns, recurring symbols, persistent themes, dreams that wake you with their intensity. These signal something important. The unconscious is trying to communicate. The goal is partnership between conscious and unconscious, ego and self. Consciousness brings clarity, decision-making capacity, and the ability to act in the world. The unconscious brings wider perspective, access to the collective wisdom of the psyche, and compensation for consciousness's inevitable blind spots. When both work together, you have access to your full psychological resources. For contemporary practitioners of psychology for sleep, This means approaching rest not as shutting down, but as opening to the unconscious's compensatory wisdom. Before sleep, you might briefly review your day, noticing where you were one sided, where balance was lost. Then you can invite the unconscious to offer its perspective, trusting that dreams will bring what consciousness needs, even if you don't remember them upon waking. The compensatory function is evidence that the psyche is self regulating, always moving toward equilibrium and wholeness. You don't have to figure everything out consciously. You don't have to control and manage every aspect of psychological life. The unconscious is your partner in the work, offering guidance and correction when you're willing to listen. This is one of Jung's most liberating insights. You're not alone in the work of becoming whole. The self is guiding the process, and the unconscious is constantly offering what consciousness needs. While Freud famously called dreams the royal road to the unconscious, Jung transformed our understanding of what that road actually leads to and why the journey matters. For Jung, dreams weren't primarily disguised wishes or repressed sexual content. They were direct communications from the unconscious, messages sent in the symbolic language. That is the psyche's native tongue. This perspective revolutionizes psychology for sleep and personal transformation. Every night when you close your eyes, you're not just resting your body. You're entering a dialogue with the depths of your own psyche, receiving guidance from an intelligence greater than your conscious ego, connecting to the collective wisdom that has guided human psychological development for millennia. Jung observed that dreams use symbols rather than concepts, images rather than words, narrative rather than logic. This isn't because the unconscious is primitive or regressed. It's because symbolic language is more precise for expressing psychological truths that can't be reduced to rational statements. A symbol carries multiple meanings simultaneously. It evokes feeling and intuition as well as thought. It connects personal and universal dimensions. When you dream of water, for instance, it's not a disguised reference to something else. Water is the appropriate symbol for unconscious material itself, fluid, deep, potentially overwhelming the medium from which consciousness emerges. When you dream of climbing a mountain, you're experiencing the archetypal pattern of ascent, of striving toward heights, of the difficulty and reward of psychological elevation. The dream is showing you in symbolic form the psychological situation you're actually in. Jung distinguished between little dreams and big dreams. Little dreams process daily residue, replaying events, working through minor emotions, helping the mind organize recent experiences. These are psychologically necessary, but not usually deeply significant. Big dreams, by contrast, come from the deeper layers of the psyche. They carry archetypal imagery. They feel numinous, powerful, unforgettable. They demand attention because they're bringing essential material from the collective unconscious or from crucial points in the individuation process. For those engaged in serious psychology, for sleep work, learning to recognize big dreams is important. They often occur at transition points before major life changes, during psychological crisis, at the beginning or end of a life phase. They may feature archetypal figures, the wise old man or woman Hada'id, the divine child, the shadow figure, the anima or animus. They may involve universal symbols, mandalas, trees, serpents, water, mountains, journeys. They leave you with a feeling of significance, even if you don't consciously understand their meaning. Jung's method of dream interpretation differed radically from Freud's. He didn't believe in fixed symbol meanings where one thing always represents another. Instead, he used a method called amplification, exploring what the symbol meant to the dreamer. Personally, how it appeared in mythology and cultural traditions, what archetypal pattern it might express, what it could mean in the context of the dreamer's current life situation. This means dream interpretation isn't mechanical. You can't just look up symbols in a dictionary and decode your dreams. You have to engage with them, wondering what they might mean from multiple angles, allowing their symbolism to work on you over time. Jung often encouraged people to sit with a dream to paint or draw its images, to actively imagine continuing the dream. While awake, all methods of deepening the dream's impact and allowing its meaning to gradually unfold. Contemporary neuroscience research has validated the importance of dreams while providing a different explanatory framework. Studies show that dreaming is essential for emotional processing, memory consolidation, creative problem solving, and threat simulation. The brain during REM sleep shows patterns of activity similar to waking consciousness, but with different chemical conditions, specifically lower levels of noradrenaline, which may allow more fluid association and less logical constraint. This neurological research doesn't contradict Jung's symbolic approach. It explains the mechanism by which dreams serve psychological functions Jung observed clinically. The brain during sleep is actively working on psychological tasks, processing emotion, integrating experience, making novel connections, and it expresses this work in the symbolic imagistic form we experience as dreams. For psychology for sleep practitioners, several principles guide working with dreams effectively. First, record them immediately upon waking. The liminal state between sleeping and full waking is when dream memory is most accessible. Keep a journal by your bed. Write down even fragments. Over time, you'll remember more and patterns will emerge. Second approach, dreams with curiosity rather than judgment. Even disturbing dreams are trying to help you compensating for conscious one-sidedness or bringing shadow material to awareness. Don't dismiss a dream because it makes you uncomfortable. Often those are the most important ones. Third, look for patterns over time rather than obsessing over individual dreams. Recurring symbols, persistent themes, characters who appear in multiple dreams. These point towards significant unconscious material that's trying to become conscious. What keeps showing up? What's the unconscious insisting you notice? Fourth, consider the feeling tone of the dream as much as its content. How did it feel? Dreams with similar symbols can have completely different meanings depending on whether they felt terrifying, peaceful, exciting, or sad. The emotion is often the key to understanding what the unconscious is communicating. Fifth, ask how the dream compensates for your waking attitude. If you're being very controlled in waking life, do your dreams feature chaos? If you're being very rational, do they emphasize emotion? The dream is likely showing you what's missing from your conscious approach. Sixth, notice archetypal elements when a dream feels bigger than personal, when it carries numinous power, when figures appear that seem to represent universal patterns rather than personal memories. You're touching the collective unconscious. These dreams often mark significant transition points in individuation. Jung emphasized that dreams are fundamentally friendly even when they're uncomfortable. They're your own psyche, trying to help you toward wholeness. A nightmare isn't the unconscious attacking you, it's the unconscious insisting you face something important. A disturbing dream about death might signal that something in your life needs to die: an old identity, an outgrown relationship, a limiting belief, so that new development can occur. One of Jung's most important contributions was recognizing that dreams can be prospective, pointing forward toward potentials and solutions, not just backward toward past causes. You might dream of situations you haven't yet encountered, solutions to problems you haven't solved, capacities you haven't developed. The unconscious can see farther than consciousness because it has access to more information, the collective wisdom of the human psyche, the teleological pull of your own individuation process, the symbolic connections that link apparently unrelated aspects of your life. For contemporary psychology for sleep work, this prospective function of dreams is especially valuable. In the quiet before sleep, you might pose a question to the unconscious. What do I need to see? What am I missing? Where should my attention go? Then release the question, trusting that if an answer is needed, it will come perhaps in a dream, perhaps in the insights that arrive upon waking, perhaps in the subtle shift of perspective that occurs when consciousness and unconscious work together. Dreams are the psyche's way of maintaining dialogue between conscious and unconscious ego and self. They're too important to ignore and too rich to reduce to simple interpretations. They're invitations to engage with your own depths to discover what the unconscious knows that consciousness hasn't yet realized, to participate in the natural healing and wholesome process that is always trying to unfold within you. Let's change the tone now. Let's get direct. Because here's what I notice happening, especially with people drawn to psychology for sleep content like this. You collect ideas. You accumulate concepts. You can talk about shadow work and archetypes and individuation. You've read the books. You followed the accounts. You nod along to the insights. But here's the question Jung would ask you. Have you actually done the work? Or have you simply intellectualized your way around the very thing he demanded you face? You tell yourself you're self-aware. You use the right language. You recognize your patterns, or at least you can describe them articulately. But recognizing a pattern isn't the same as changing it. Talking about your shadow isn't the same as integrating it. Understanding that you project doesn't automatically stop you from projecting. Jung wasn't offering comfortable ideas to make you feel psychologically sophisticated. He was demanding transformation. And transformation hurts. It requires something far more difficult than collecting insights. It requires facing what you've spent your entire life avoiding. Right now in this moment, there's a version of yourself you refuse to see. Not the curated self you present on social media. Not the competent self you perform at work. Not even the honest self you share with close friends. Deeper than all of that is the self you hide, even from yourself. The qualities you judge, the needs you deny, the desires you suppress, the weaknesses you can't admit, the power you won't claim. This is your shadow. And it's not waiting politely in the background until you're ready to address it. It's running your life from behind the scenes, making decisions you think are conscious choices, creating patterns you think are just bad luck, sabotaging relationships you think failed, for external reasons. Every person you can't stand, they're showing you something about yourself. Every quality you judge harshly in others, you're denying it in yourself. Every time you have an emotional reaction that's out of proportion to what actually happened, your shadow is speaking. Jung said it plainly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Not poetry, not metaphor. Reality. Your unconscious is running the show and you're pretending you're in charge. You come to psychology for sleep content because your mind won't quiet. You scroll through insights at night looking for the magic understanding that will finally fix you. But here's what you're avoiding. The content you consume is serving the same function as any other addiction. It's keeping you from actually feeling, from actually descending, from actually facing what needs to be faced. The irony is brutal. You're using psychology content to avoid the psychological work. You're using information about the unconscious to stay safely in your head, where everything can be understood, categorized, and kept at arm's length. But the unconscious doesn't live in your head. It lives in your body, in your emotions, in the places you're terrified to go. Consider what you're actually doing right now. You're listening to words about transformation while maintaining the same fundamental relationship with yourself you've always had. You're learning about individuation while remaining comfortably identified with your persona. You're hearing about shadow work while your actual shadow remains completely unaddressed. You tell yourself, I'm doing the work. But what work? Reading isn't work. Listening isn't work. Understanding isn't work. The work is what happens when you turn off this video, put down the book, stop consuming content, and actually sit with yourself. When you feel the feelings you've been avoiding. When you admit the truths you've been denying. When you face the parts of yourself that terrify you. Here's what Jung would say to you directly. Stop being so damn clever about your own unconscious. Stop collecting concepts like armor against actually having to change. Stop performing self-awareness as a substitute for a transformation. The person you judge most harshly in your life, that person is showing you your shadow. The quality that triggers you most intensely. That quality exists in you. The pattern that keeps repeating despite your best efforts. That pattern will continue until you stop analyzing it and start actually integrating the unconscious material driving it. You don't have a shadow problem. You have a seeing problem. You have a courage problem. You have an honesty problem. Let's talk about the specific ways you avoid the real work while convincing yourself you're engaged in it. These are the patterns I see constantly in people drawn to psychology for sleep and depth content. See if you recognize yourself. Pattern 1. You collect psychological concepts the way some people collect antique furniture. You know about Jung's archetypes about the shadow, about the anima and animus. You can reference different schools of thought. You've developed sophisticated psychological vocabulary. But this knowledge functions as a defense. It creates the illusion that understanding equals change. It lets you observe your patterns from a comfortable distance rather than being disrupted by them. You say things like, "Oh, that's my shadow," with the same casualness as saying, "Oh, that's my coffee cup." Sorry, you've turned the most demanding concept in Jung's entire psychology into a friendly label. You've domesticated what should terrify you. The shadow isn't something you can chat about casually. It's the denied, repressed, split off aspects of yourself that have enough power to destroy your life if left unconscious. But you've turned it into a concept you reference, not a reality you confront. Pattern 2. You mistake emotional awareness for emotional integration. You can identify your feelings. You know when you're anxious, when you're sad, when you're angry. You might even journal about these feelings, talk about them in therapy, share them with safe people. But identifying feelings isn't the same as actually feeling them, fully allowing them to move through you, learning what they're trying to teach you. You've learned to observe your emotions from a slight remove, narrating them rather than inhabiting them. I notice I'm feeling anxious is different from simply being anxious, being in the experience without the observing commentary, the narration, the analysis, the stepping back to observe. These are all ego defenses against actually being vulnerable to your own inner life. Pattern 3. You project your unlived life onto others and call it appreciation or aspiration. You admire people who are authentic, who have clear boundaries, who live boldly. You watch them, study them, maybe even interview them or read their work. But you don't recognize that what you're admiring in them is your own potential that you're not actualizing. The authentic person you admire, that's your own unlived authenticity projected outward. The person with clear boundaries, that's your own denied boundary setting capacity. The bold risk taker, that's your own shadow contained courage that you won't claim. You're externalizing your potential rather than embodying it, then calling this externalization inspiration or aspiration when it's actually projection and avoidance. Pattern 4. You perform vulnerability as a way to avoid actual vulnerability. You share your struggles in therapy with friends on social media. You're honest about your challenges. You might even talk about your shadow, your wounding, your unresolved trauma. But there's a way to share vulnerability that keeps you safe, that maintains control, that lets you appear authentic while staying protected. Real vulnerability would be admitting what you actually judge yourself for, what you're genuinely ashamed of, what you're truly terrified others might discover about you. Real vulnerability would be sharing the parts of yourself that don't fit your self-image, not just the acceptable struggles that prove you're human, but keep you sympathetic. Pattern 5. You use psychological insight to justify your limitations rather than transcend them. You've analyzed your childhood. You understand your attachment style. You know your trauma history. And you use this knowledge to explain why you can't change rather than as a foundation for changing. I can't be direct because I'm conflict avoidant due to my family system. I can't trust because I have an anxious attachment style. I can't set boundaries because I was conditioned to people please. These statements are true and also completely insufficient, their explanations being used as excuses. Understanding the origin of a pattern doesn't automatically mean you're stuck with it, but you can use understanding as a sophisticated way to stay stuck. Pattern 6. You seek psychological transformation through consumption rather than confrontation. You read books, listen to podcasts, watch videos, attend workshops. You're constantly consuming content about psychology. about healing, about transformation. And you believe that this consumption is the work itself. But transformation doesn't happen through consumption. It happens through confrontation with your shadow, with your projections, with your defenses, with the parts of yourself you've disowned. Reading about shadow work is not shadow work. Listening to someone talk about integration is not integration. Consuming content about psychology for sleep and transformation is not transformation. It's often the exact opposite, a way to stay busy, so you don't have to actually change. Here's what's actually happening. You're using psychological knowledge the way medieval Christians used indulgences. You think that accumulating insights earns you some kind of spiritual or psychological credit. That understanding equals progress. That the more you know about the psyche, the healthier yours must be. But Jung would tell you that knowledge without confrontation is worthless. Worse than worthless, it's a defense masquerading as development. Now let's talk about why these patterns are so common, so persistent, so difficult to break. It's not just personal failure. The culture you live in actively reinforces staying unconscious. The entire social structure benefits from you remaining divided against yourself, consuming content as a substitute for transformation, performing self-awareness, rather than embodying it. From childhood, you're taught to split yourself, to show the acceptable parts and hide the unacceptable ones, to perform emotions that gain approval while suppressing emotions that create discomfort. You learn that who you really are is not okay, that your authentic self needs to be managed, controlled, carefully edited for public consumption. Your family had rules spoken or unspoken about what could be acknowledged. We don't talk about that. We're not angry people. Obas, we're fine. You learned which emotions were safe to express and which would be punished, dismissed, or met with uncomfortable silence. So you split off the unacceptable parts, created a persona that fit the family's mythology, and relegated everything else to shadow. School reinforced this fragmentation. Sit still. Don't question authority. Follow the rules. The creative, questioning, energetic parts of you that didn't fit the institutional mold were labeled problems to be fixed. You learned to value compliance over authenticity, performance over genuine expression. You learned that being rewarded meant being who they wanted, not who you were. Religion for many people provided another layer of splitting. The divine, the good, the light, these were acceptable. The body desires anger. Doubt these were sins to be confessed and overcome. The message was clear. Large parts of your human nature are wrong and must be repressed. Spiritual growth meant eliminating rather than integrating, transcending rather than becoming whole. As you moved into the working world, capitalism added its demands. Be productive, be efficient, monetize your gifts. Your worth became measured by output, by what you could produce, by how useful you were to the system. Rest became laziness. Depth became self-indulgence. Any aspect of your humanity that couldn't be commodified or marketed was suspect. And now, in the age of social media, you're taught to perform your entire life for public consumption, to curate, to optimize, to brand yourself. Authenticity becomes content. Vulnerability becomes engagement strategy. Even your healing journey becomes something to document, to share, to receive validation for. The performance never stops. This is why psychology for sleep content, while valuable, can also serve the system's interests. It lets you feel like you're doing something about your psychological distress while actually keeping you trapped in consumption mode. Watch the video, read the article, save the post, feel temporarily better. Repeat. The cycle continues, the discomfort is managed but never resolved, and the system that created your fragmentation in the first place remains unchallenged. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The system needs you asleep. It needs you fragmented. It needs you seeking solutions in consumption rather than finding them in confrontation. Because a person who actually individuates, who actually integrates their shadow, who actually becomes whole, that person stops being so easily controlled, manipulated, and exploited. The person who knows themselves can't be sold an identity. The person who's integrated their shadow can't be controlled through guilt or shame. The person who's withdrawn their projections can't be manipulated through tribalism and enemy creation. The person who's in relationship with their own depths doesn't need the constant stimulation and distraction the economy depends on. This is why real individuation is rare, not because it's impossible, but because everything in the culture works against it. You're rewarded for staying fragmented, for being the good consumer, the productive worker, the agreeable personality. You're punished for becoming whole, by being misunderstood, by losing relationships built on your persona, by no longer fitting into the categories society uses to organize and control people. The culture tells you to find yourself while simultaneously providing endless distractions that prevent you from ever doing so. It tells you to be authentic while punishing actual authenticity. It tells you to heal while creating the conditions that keep you wounded and seeking. It offers you 1,000 different paths to transformation, while ensuring that none of them require you to actually confront your unconscious. And here's where it gets truly insidious. The culture has learned to commodify even the tools of genuine transformation. Therapy becomes a consumer service rather than a confrontation with your depths. Meditation becomes an optimization hack rather than a practice of facing your mind. Psychology becomes content to consume rather than work to undertake. Even shadow work gets turned into a weekend workshop, a course you can buy, a process that can be managed and controlled. Jung would be horrified by this commodification. He knew that real psychological transformation can't be purchased, can't be conveniently scheduled, can't be wrapped up in a neat package with clear steps and guaranteed results. It's messy, slow, unpredictable, and fundamentally at odds with consumer culture's promise of quick fixes and painless solutions. So when you find yourself consuming psychology for sleep content, ask yourself honestly, am I using this as a doorway to actual work, or as a substitute for it? Am I willing to turn off the video and face my actual experience? Or do I need another hour of content first? Am I engaging with these ideas to transform, or to feel like I'm transforming, while remaining fundamentally unchanged? The answer requires ruthless honesty. And most of us, most of the time, don't want to be that honest. We'd rather maintain the illusion that we're doing the work while actually staying safe in consumption mode. We'd rather feel psychologically sophisticated than be psychologically confronted. But Jung demands the confrontation. His psychology isn't therapy in the conventional sense. It's initiation. And initiation requires you to die to who you've been so you can be born into who you actually are. The culture can't offer that. Content can't provide that. Only you willing to descend into your own depths can do that work. Now we arrive at what Jung actually demands of you. Not intellectual understanding, but psychological transformation. Not collecting concepts, but confronting your actual unconscious material. Not performing awareness, but becoming conscious of what has been unconscious. First, your shadow is not an interesting concept to explore. It's the repository of everything about yourself you find unacceptable. Everything you judge harshly in others lives first in you. The selfishness you despise, yours. The weakness you condemn, yours. The fakeness you mock, yours. But also, and this is what people forget, the power you admire, the confidence you envy, the creativity you wish for. Also yours, also shadow. Jung said the shadow is 90% gold, but you have to dig through the shit to find it. And most people won't do that digging. They'd rather project their gold onto others, admiring from a distance what they refuse to claim in themselves. They'd rather keep the shadow split off, maintaining the fiction of their conscious self-image, live in a half-life, while their full potential remains buried. To face the shadow means admitting what you've spent your life denying, that you're capable of cruelty, that you have needs you've labeled shameful, that you judge others to avoid judging yourself, that you're not as virtuous, as selfless, as evolved as you want to believe. This admission destroys the ego's preferred self-image. That's why most people won't do it. They'd rather stay fragmented than face this uncomfortable truth. But they'd also have to admit their power, their capacity for boldness, for assertion, for taking up space, the ways they've made themselves small to avoid threatening others, the gifts they've buried because claiming them would mean responsibility, the authentic desires they've repressed because pursuing them would disrupt the life they've carefully constructed. Shadow integration doesn't mean acting out every impulse. It means making the shadow conscious, seeing it clearly, understanding its origins and functions, finding mature ways to integrate its energy. The rage you've repressed doesn't need to be unleashed on others, but it does need to be acknowledged, felt, understood. Then its energy can be channeled into healthy boundary setting, into passion for what matters, into the capacity to say no without guilt. Second, your projections are showing you yourself. Every person who triggers intense reaction in you is a mirror. Not because they're not actually problematic, they might be genuinely difficult people, but the intensity of your reaction reveals your unconscious material. You don't react strongly to qualities that aren't alive in your own psyche either, as disowned shadow or as unlived potential, the narcissist you despise. Look at your own grandiosity, your own need for admiration, your own ways of making everything about you. It's there. You just call it by different names. Confidence, high standards, knowing your worth, but the structure is the same ego. Inflation need for validation, inability to see from another's perspective. The weak person you judge. Look at your own denied vulnerability, your own places of helplessness that you've overcompensated for by developing a false strength. You judge weakness so harshly because you're terrified of your own. You've built an identity around being strong, capable, never needing anyone. But that's not wholeness. That's defensiveness masquerading as strength. The authentic person you idealize. That's your own unlived authenticity. You have it. You're just not expressing it, not claiming it, not risking the consequences of being fully yourself. You project it onto others and call it admiration. But really, it's your own psyche showing you what you need to develop. Withdrawing projections is painful because it means taking responsibility. You can no longer blame others for having the qualities you despise. You can no longer put others on pedestals to avoid developing those qualities yourself. You have to see yourself clearly in all your contradictory, complex, imperfect humanity. Most people would rather keep projecting than face that mirror. Third, your persona is not you. The role you play, good child, successful professional, caring, helper, intellectual, spiritual seeker, wounded healer is a mask. A necessary mask for social functioning? Yes, but still a mask. And you've become so identified with the mask that you think it's your face. Who would you be without their approval? Without the role they need you to play? Without the identity you've spent decades constructing and maintaining? This question terrifies the ego because the answer is you don't know. You've never been that person because you've been too busy being who you thought you should be. Individuation requires dropping the persona at least partially. Not completely, you still need to function in the world, but enough to discover who actually lives beneath the role. This means disappointing people. It means no longer fitting their expectations. It means being misunderstood, judged, possibly rejected by those who preferred your persona to your authentic self. The people pleaser has to risk displeasure. The intellectual has to risk being simple. The strong one has to risk vulnerability. The spiritual seeker has to risk being human. The helper has to risk receiving. Whatever role you've been playing has to be seen as role rather than identity. Fourth, the work is not intellectual, it's experiential. You cannot think your way to individuation. You cannot analyze your way through shadow integration. You cannot understand your way into wholeness. At some point, you have to feel what you've been avoiding, admit what you've been denying, face what you've been running from. This means sitting with uncomfortable emotions without immediately trying to fix, understand, or escape them. It means allowing your defenses to soften rather than reflexively strengthening them. It means being willing to not know, to be uncertain, to feel what Jung called creative illness, the disorientation that precedes genuine transformation. Most people won't do this because it feels like falling apart. The ego interprets descent into the unconscious as danger, as loss of control, as potential annihilation. So it resists with every defense mechanism available. It intellectualizes it, spiritualizes it, performs insight while maintaining control. Real descent means surrendering that control, at least temporarily. Most people would rather stay safe and fragmented than surrender into the unknown of their own depths. Fifth, individuation is lonely. Jung was clear about this. The crowd resents the individual. The collective pressures everyone toward conformity. When you begin to actualize your unique psychological truth, you will be misunderstood. You will be judged. You will lose relationships that were built on your persona rather than your authentic self. People will accuse you of changing, of being selfish, of not being who you used to be. They're right. You're not who you used to be. That's the point. but they preferred who you used to be because that version of you fit their needs, their expectations, their comfortable categories. The individuated version of you doesn't fit. They have to relate to you as you actually are, and many people aren't willing to do that. This doesn't mean individuation makes you isolated or antisocial, but it does mean your relationships fundamentally change. They become based on authenticity rather than role playing on reality, rather than projection on mutual respect between whole persons, rather than unconscious collusion between fragmented personas. These relationships are richer, deeper, more real, but they're also fewer. Quality over quantity. The loneliness of individuation is the price of becoming yourself. Most people aren't willing to pay it. They'd rather have the comfort of fitting in than the authenticity of standing alone. They'd rather maintain relationships based on mutual projection than risk the vulnerability of being fully seen. They'd rather stay safely in the collective than undertake the solo journey into their own depths. But here's what Jung knew, and what keeps people on this path. Despite its difficulty, the alternative is worse. To not individuate is to live someone else's life in your own body. To die without ever meeting yourself. To spend decades playing a role and call it a life. To reach the end with the horrifying recognition that you never actually lived as yourself. What awaits on the other side of shadow integration, projection, withdrawal, persona, dissolution, and descent into the unconscious is not comfort. Jung never promised comfort. What he promised was authenticity, wholeness, meaning the capacity to live your own life, rather than the life others expected of you. Internally, you stop needing external validation to know your worth because you've made contact with the self, the organizing center of the psyche that exists independent of others' opinions. You cease being controlled by unconscious complexes because you've made them conscious. You can hold paradox, contradiction, and complexity without needing to resolve everything into simple certainty. Your emotions become information rather than identity. You can feel rage without being consumed by it, sadness without being destroyed by it, joy without desperately trying to hold on to it. You develop emotional literacy, the capacity to read your own inner states accurately and respond to them appropriately rather than being hijacked by them. You reclaim the energy that was trapped in repression. The shadow material you spent decades keeping unconscious required enormous psychological energy to maintain. When integrated, that energy becomes available for creative work, for genuine relationship, for actually living, rather than merely defending against life. Relationally, everything shifts. You stop projecting your shadow onto others, so you can actually see them, rather than seeing your own unconscious material reflected back. You stop seeking in relationships what you haven't developed in yourself. So partnerships become meetings between whole people, rather than mutual neediness masquerading as love. You attract people at your level of consciousness. The unconscious relating, the gameplay, the mutual projection that characterizes most relationships no longer holds appeal. You're willing to be alone rather than settle for connection based on anything less than authenticity. And when you do connect, it's real two individuals meeting, as they actually are not as they pretend to be. You can be loved for who you actually are, rather than for the persona you perform. This is terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Terrifying because you're fully exposed with no masks to hide behind. Liberating because you're finally being met as yourself, which is what every human secretly longs for, to be fully known and still loved. Existentially meaning emerges from within rather than being sought externally. You stop needing your life to look a certain way to feel valuable. Achievement loses its compulsive quality because you're not trying to prove anything to others or yourself. You can engage with work, with creativity, with contribution, because it genuinely expresses who you are, not because you need it to validate you. You stand rooted in yourself rather than swayed by collective opinion. This doesn't mean arrogance or isolation. It means psychological independence, the capacity to listen to others while maintaining your own center, to be influenced without being determined by external forces. You develop what Jung called the treasure hard to attain, an inner stability that doesn't depend on circumstances. Life becomes creative expression rather than obligation. You're no longer trapped by should, by have to, by what's expected. You act from desire rooted in the self's guidance rather than from fear rooted in the ego's insecurity. You inhabit your life as the author rather than observing it as a spectator or enduring it as a victim. And perhaps, most importantly, you develop the capacity for genuine solitude. Not loneliness, but solitude. The ability to be with yourself, without distraction, without entertainment, without the constant need for external stimulation or validation. You become your own best company because you've met yourself, integrated yourself, and found that who you actually are is worth being with. Jung believed that this integration between two individuated people, two whole persons meeting as equals, is the rarest and most beautiful form of relationship. Not codependency or mutual projection or unconscious collusion, but two individuals, each rooted in their own depths, meeting without needing anything from each other, choosing to be together from overflow rather than from deficiency. These people don't complete each other because they're already complete. They don't fix each other because they've done their own healing work. They don't perform for each other because they're too authentic for performance. They simply meet two souls recognizing each other, sharing the journey, honoring the mystery of the other without trying to possess or change them. This is what individuation makes possible. Not perfection, not the end of suffering, not some transcendent state of enlightenment. Just this, the capacity to live authentically, to be yourself without apology, to relate genuinely without projection, to create from your depths, to find meaning from within, to die having actually lived as yourself. Most people never know this. They live their entire lives on the surface, identified with persona controlled by shadow, seeking externally what can only be found within. They die as strangers to themselves, never having made the descent, never having faced the darkness, never having claimed their own depths. But you have a choice, not comfort versus discomfort, but truth versus performance, reality versus delusion, authenticity versus role-playing, your own life versus the life others need you to live. The shadow is waiting. It has always been waiting. Your unlived life is there in the darkness you've been avoiding. Your power, your authenticity, your wholeness, all buried where you refuse to look. For those who engage with psychology, for sleep and transformation, as more than entertainment, more than consumption, more than intellectual exercise for those willing to actually do the work, This is the invitation. Stop collecting concepts. Start confronting your unconscious. Stop performing awareness. Start becoming conscious. Stop reading about transformation. Start transforming. Jung offers no shortcuts, no easy path, no comfortable process, just the promise that the person who descends into their own depths and does the hard work of integration will emerge more whole, more real, more themselves than they ever were before. And that is worth everything. And so we return to where we began, to that edge between darkness and light consciousness, and unconscious waking and sleep. The mist still clings to the earth. The forest still holds its breath. The world still pauses in that liminal space where transformation becomes possible. But you are different now than when this journey began. You've walked through the architecture of the psyche, meeting the structures Jung mapped across his lifetime. You've encountered the archetypal figures living in the collective unconscious, the shadow and the anima and the animus, the wise old man and the great mother, the trickster and the divine child. You've understood the mechanisms by which the psyche heals itself, through dreams, through the compensatory function of the unconscious, through the transcendent function that unites opposites. And you've been confronted with what Jung actually demands. Not intellectual understanding, but experiential transformation. Not collecting concepts, but facing your shadow. Not performing awareness, but withdrawing projections. Not studying the psyche, but participating in your own individuation. We've explored how the collective unconscious connects every human being to something far older than individual consciousness, a shared psychological substrate that makes us kin with every person who has ever lived. How archetypes shape our perception and behavior through universal patterns that repeat across cultures and throughout history. How the ego is necessary but not sufficient, and beneath it lies the self, the totality of your being, conscious and unconscious, personal and collective, known and unknown. We've seen how the shadow contains both the darkness you've denied and the gold you've buried, how everything you reject in yourself and project onto others is your own unlived potential, waiting to be reclaimed. How the anima and animus represent the contrasexual dimensions within every psyche, calling you to integrate what your culture split into masculine and feminine fragments. How the persona serves a social function, but becomes a prison when you forget it's a mask rather than your face. We've understood how dreams are the royal road to the unconscious, not random neural firing, but symbolic communications from depths wiser than the conscious ego. How the unconscious compensates for conscious one-sidedness, always working to restore balance, always calling the psyche toward holiness. How the transcendent function emerges when you can hold opposing forces without choosing sides, allowing a third position to crystallize from the tension itself. And we've confronted the uncomfortable truth that most people drawn to psychology for sleep and transformation use these ideas as defenses against the very work they purport to undertake. How you might be collecting concepts rather than confronting your actual experience. How the culture conditions you to stay fragmented, to consume solutions rather than embody transformation. How real individuation is rare because it requires descent integration and the willingness to become yourself even when that disappoints others. Jung's psychology is not therapy in the conventional sense, it's initiation. He offers no promise of happiness, no guarantee of comfort, no technique for painless growth. What he offers is something more valuable and more demanding, a map of the psyche's depths and an invitation to descend. For those willing to undertake this journey, what awaits is not perfection, but wholeness. Not the end of suffering, but the capacity to suffer consciously, to make meaning from pain, to transform wounds into wisdom. Not certainty, but the ability to hold uncertainty without collapsing. Not fitting in, but standing alone in your authentic truth. Not being understood, but being yourself, regardless. The path Jung illuminated is not for everyone. Most people will choose the comfort of remaining unconscious over the confrontation that consciousness demands. They'll collect his ideas without enacting his challenge. They'll admire individuation in others without attempting it themselves. And that's okay. Jung knew his psychology wasn't for the masses. It was for individuals willing to become individuals, willing to separate from the collective, descend into their depths, and emerge transformed. If you've listened this far, something in you recognizes this call. Perhaps you've felt it before, the dissatisfaction with surface living, the sense that there's more to you than the roles you play, the quiet but persistent feeling that you're not actually living your own life. That's the self-calling. That's the psyche insisting on its own unfoldment. That's your depths trying to become conscious. The work ahead is yours alone. No one can face your shadow for you. No one can withdraw your projections. No one can descend into your unconscious depths and do the integration work that only you can do. Teachers can point the way. Maps can show the territory. But you must walk the path yourself. And you don't walk it by consuming more content. You walk it by turning inward, by paying attention to your dreams, to your reactions to the patterns that repeat in your life, by asking honestly what you're avoiding, what you're projecting, what you're refusing to see, by developing the courage to face the darkness within you, not to destroy it, but to integrate it, to reclaim the gold buried in shadow, to become whole rather than divided. This is what psychology for sleep and waking life ultimately offers. Not escape from reality, but deeper engagement with it. Not answers that allow you to rest, but questions that call you to transformation. Not comfort, but the capacity to live authentically despite discomfort. Not fitting in, but becoming yourself fully. May you find the courage to descend. May you develop the strength to face what you discover there. May you integrate the shadow, withdraw the projections, and drop the persona that has been hiding your authentic face. May you become who you actually are, beneath all the masks, all the performance, all the borrowed identities. The path ahead remains shrouded in mist. The work ahead is difficult, lonely, and often confusing. But it is your work, your life, your depths waiting to be explored, your wholeness waiting to be realized, your authentic self waiting to be born. The world inside you is vast. The journey inward is infinite. The psyche's call to wholeness is persistent. Jung mapped this territory, but only you can walk it. Only you can face your shadow, integrate your depths, and emerge from this process more yourself than you've ever been. So settle into this last moment before sleep. Let your breathing deepen. Let the boundary between waking and unconscious become thin. And carry with you this invitation to stop consuming and start confronting, to stop performing and start being. to stop avoiding and start descending. Your shadow is waiting. Your wholeness is possible. Your authentic life is calling. The only question is whether you'll answer, whether you'll do the work rather than just collecting ideas about the work, whether you'll become an individual rather than remaining comfortable in the collective.